a whole novel about a 3-minute phone call with Joseph Stalin, a collection of body horror stories edited by Joyce Carol Oates, a sequel to Animal Farm where Manor Farm has become a petting zoo, and a novel set in 1970s Midwest America that is narrated by a dead dog named Molly. That and so much more is what I have in store for you today. As usual, I have been keeping my eye out for books published by small presses, independent publishers, and university presses within the past month, and I have a huge selection of books that were published in September 2023 to share with you today. Most of these were published in the US and in Canada, but there are a few sprinkled in here that were published in the UK and in Australia within the past month. So I know not everybody can get their hands on all of these books, but if you're like me, you just like knowing what's being published out there, even if you know you can't read them all. September 2023 was a huge month for amazing sounding books, so let me know in the comments below which of these books piqued your interest. First, I want to mention 4 books that I previously talked about in my fall pre-orders video. First up, we have Good Women by Halle, and this is published by Hub City Press. And these are 12 short stories featuring Black women across the Appalachian South. I have this on pre-order from my library and can't wait for it to come in. We also have At Night He Lifts Weights by Kang Young-sook, and it's translated by Janet Hong from Transit Books. And these are dystopian short stories from a celebrated Korean author. And then the 2 books from September that got the most votes in my fall pre-order video are Peach Pit, 16 Stories of Unsavory Women from Dzanc Books. And this is an anthology featuring many different amazing authors, and all the stories feature monstrous women. And also a novel called Landscapes by Christina Lede, and this is published by $2 Radio. And this is a reimagining of the country house novel, and it's also a near future, near apocalypse story that really dives into the meaning of art during a time of survival. And if you want to know more about those books, check out my fall pre-orders video, which I'll link below because I go into them in more detail. Also out in September in the US is I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel, and this in the US is being published by Graywolf. It was already published in the UK and was longlisted for the 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction, and there's already a ton of content on YouTube about it, so I'm not going to describe it, but I will link to Scott's video over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, who always does an amazing job of reviewing books. His review of this book is fantastic, as usual. From Biblioasis is a novel called The Future, and it's by Catherine Leroux. And this is making a bunch of best of fall 2023 lists. It's a speculative alternative history in which the French never surrendered the city of Detroit. It is told in multiple viewpoints, including the viewpoint of a character named Gloria, who's a woman who's searching for her missing granddaughter in a city that is roiling with toxic spills and crime and chaos. And Gloria's search leads her to a local park where orphaned children have created a kind of like utopian kingdom, all with their own rules and hierarchies and structure, and sounds quite fascinating. From Other Press is a novel called The Suicide Museum, and it's by Ariel Dorfman. And the short premise of this novel, that's kind of hard to describe, is that a billionaire Holocaust survivor hires a writer whose name is Ariel Dorfman, who is also the writer of the actual book, to uncover the truth of Chilean President Salvador Allende's 1973 death. So the billionaire and the writer kind of embark on this journey around the world and encounter a wide cast of characters to try and solve this death of Allende. The publisher always sends amazing emails about their new releases from Other Press. And so from the publisher's email about the book, when did you last read a book where the author uses his own name, life, thoughts, trauma, shortcomings, yearnings, and more, and positions his alter ego as the main character of a thriller attempting to resolve once and for all a very disturbing enigma of the 20th century? From Tin House is a book of short stories called Dearborn, and this is by Ghassan Zeineddine. And this is I've read this collection. I just finished it. This is a wonderful collection of short stories, and they all take place in Dearborn, Michigan, and they feature primarily Lebanese American families, and they're funny and heartwarming and really very moving. They aren't exactly linked stories, but because they all take place in the same community, you'll see people and places and things pop up in stories that you've seen in earlier stories, which is very cool. Every single story has a ton of backstory that's woven in, so that there's a lot of shifting in time from present to past. And I think that's really fitting for the characters that are in these stories, because a lot of them were born and grew up in Lebanon. And so the stories, much like the people, kind of have a foot in both worlds, but a foot in Lebanon, a foot in Dearborn, a foot in the past, a foot in the present. Structurally, it just fits so well with the characters and the plots of each story. So there's also an amazing story in here about a man who hides his money in frozen chickens. And that's just, if that doesn't sell the collection for you, I don't know what else to tell you, because that's an amazing premise. From Saddle Road Press is The Lead to Our Undoing, and this is by Donald Mengay. In this novel, we are in the 1970s Rust Belt America, and our narrator is a dead dog. Hear me out, because Kirkus actually calls this novel a triumph. Molly is the dead dog narrator, and Molly is reflecting on her life with her owner, who's a young boy named Jake, and also with Jake's twin sister, Wren. So Molly watches as Jake and Wren grow up and fall in love, and how their interracial and queer relationships that both Jake and Wren find themselves in as they grow up are rejected by their family. And the prose is described as dense but eloquent. And I love the quote from Kirkus that says, "A close look at falling in and out of love through the eyes of a dog. A smart dog who has clearly read the modernists." Because I guess there's a lot of references to modernist literature in this book. From Akashic Books is A Darker Shade of Noir, and this is a short story anthology edited by Joyce Carol Oates. These are all stories of body horror from 15 women writers, and it includes writers such as Margaret Atwood, Tanana Reeve Dew, Amy Bender, Cassandra Kah, Lisa Lim, Elizabeth Hand, and Raven Leilani. Oates writes in her introduction to the volume that body horror in its myriad manifestations speaks most powerfully to women and girls. And to find out why, you should check out this book. The introduction goes on from there, but I encourage you to actually look it up, because it's actually quite a fascinating take on body horror. From Unnamed Press is a novel called Kill for Love, and this is by Laura Picklesimer, and this is a satirical thriller that spins the traditional serial killer narrative on its head. It is about a sorority sister in LA, whose name is Tiffany, who discovers one night after a frat party hookup gone horribly, violently wrong, that she is developing an insatiable desire to kill attractive young men. From Norton is a novel called Dayswork, and this is by Jennifer Habel and Chris Bachelder. And the authors of this novel are actually husband and wife. And this is a story about a woman who becomes obsessed with Herman Melville while on pandemic lockdown with her husband and 2 daughters. And one of the themes apparently is that continuously crops up is the toll that creativity can take on partnerships like marriages and friendships. Publisher's website says, Dayswork considers the blurry lines between life and literature, the slippage between what happens and what gets recorded, and the ways we locate ourselves in the lives of others. And Alexander Chee calls it a love letter to literature. From the University of Texas is a collection edited by George Getcho, and it's called The Pastures of the Empty Page, Fellow Writers on the Life and Legacy of Larry McMurtry. And these are, just like it sounds, essays from multiple authors about Larry McMurtry, who passed away in 2021, and they're about his life and work, about his friendships with these writers, and about his legacy. From Ugly Duckling Press is a book called 11, and this is by Carlos Soto Roman, and it's translated by 8 different translators, so I'll list them below. I think if you were interested in the Suicide Museum book that by Ariel Dorfman that I mentioned earlier, that you should also read this book. The title of this book evokes what's often called the other September 11th, which is September 11, 1973. And that's when Augusto Pinochet led the military coup to oust Chilean President Salvador Allende, which was the topic of the Suicide Museum novel, which I mentioned a minute ago. And it is no coincidence that these two books came out just this past month, because it was the 50th anniversary of the coup. So I'm sure that that was very purposeful timing. So this book is assembled from found material from the time, including declassified documents and testimonies. And like I mentioned, there are eight translators that worked on these poems, which take the form of collage and erasure poems and lists and really interesting formats for these poems. And Cristina Rivera Garza says, Carlos Soto Roman's work teaches us that history doesn't just happen, but is always happening to us. From Atlantic Books is a book called 21st Century Tolkien, What Middle-earth Means to Us Today. And this is by Nick Groom. And as the title suggests, this book sets out to prove that the work of J.R.R. Tolkien is more relevant now than ever before. And the book proves this by closely examining and reinterpreting Tolkien's life and work, while also exploring later adaptations, such as Peter Jackson's movies. And it is described as engaging, original, radical, and unexpected. From Giramondo is The Idealist by Nicholas Joes, and this is set in Australia, East Timor, and Washington in the lead up to the East Timorese independence referendum in 1999. And this is about a character named Jake, who is an Australian defense analyst and is torn between his support and his heart for the people of East Timor, but also his responsibility for and complicity in the actions of his government as a defense analyst. And when Jake is found dead in the garage of his Washington home, his wife Anne is determined to see justice done. When I started reading that description, it didn't start out sounding like a thriller, but I do believe it is a thriller. It certainly ends thrillery. From Unnamed Press is a novel called Free Nancy Esting, and it's by Fred Bashid. It sounds so very different that I'm just going to read directly pieces from the blurb. So inside a Pasadena coffee shop, a free-spirited artist model and a reserved astrobiologist entangle themselves in conversation and the fabric of reality. Forced to share a table, strangers Nancy and Spencer can't help but talk to each other, leading to a debate over the pros and cons of scientific objectivity and artistic value. They eventually discover that they have a common preoccupation, the mysteries of the universe. And the publisher calls it charming, quick-paced, and baked in Pasadena sunshine. And it also says that it has a tip of the private investigator's hat, a nod to rom-coms, and a dash of Iranian mysticism. From Small Beer Press is a novella called OK Psyche, and it's by Anya Johanna De Niro. And this is described as an enigmatic and playful speculative novella about an unnamed trans woman on an epic, strange journey in the near future Midwest. Booklist said it was for fans of Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. From the publisher, it says, her son and her ex live in another state. Environmental disasters are being outsourced to the Midwest. She can't decide whether or not to unbox the companion automaton under her bed, and some of her friends may not just be ghosting her, they might not even be real. From Tory House Press is a short story collection called The Missing Morning Star and Other Stories, and this is by Stacey Shannon Dennett Sosi, and this is the author's debut collection, and these are stories that confront, as the blurb says, long-reaching effects of settler colonialism on Native lives. And the examples of the stories include a young Navajo man catches a ride home alongside a casket he's sure contains his dead grandfather. A gas station clerk witnesses the kidnapping of the newly crowned Miss Northwestern Arizona. And a young couple's search for a sperm donor raises questions of blood quantum. And Kirkus's review calls this gorgeously written. From Red Hen Press is a fantasy novel called Curse Breakers, and this is by Madeline Nakamura. I actually almost added this to my pre-order video. This is a fantasy novel about an exposition and professor of magic who has a complicated past and has discovered a conspiracy to inflict magical comas on the citizens of the city of Astrum. And the characters in this novel also, it sounds like, grapple with their own mental health struggles as they search for a way to stop this spreading curse. And it received a starred review from Kirkus. From Two Lines Press is a book called Self-Portrait in Green, and this is by Marie Ndiaye, and it's translated by Jordan Stump. And this is actually not a new book. This is the 10th anniversary edition of a book that Amina Kane calls one of the most mysterious, spectral, appealing, and uncategorizable books I've ever read. It's a memoir, maybe. It's a novel, maybe. It's a fable, maybe. What it is a chronicle of encounters with these mysterious green women. From the publisher's website, it says, "Who are these green women?" Well, they are powerful. One is a disciplinarian teacher. They are mysterious. One haunts a house like a ghost. They are seductive. One marries her best friend's father. And they are unbearably personal. One is the author's own mother. What they really all are actually aspects of their creator, an author celebrated worldwide as one of France's leading writers. And there are actually photos in here in this anniversary edition. So I can't wait to dig into that one. From the Feminist Press is a novel called Wild Geese by Sula Emanuel. And this is the story of Phoebe, who is a trans Irish woman living in Denmark and is 3 years into her gender transition. And she gets an unexpected visit from her ex-girlfriend and spends one long weekend. I think the book takes place over just this long weekend, rekindling their romance and navigating, as the blurb says, the jagged edges of nostalgia and hope. And it's described as lyrical, bittersweet, meandering, and worth lingering over. From Coffee House Press is a novel called The Devil of the Provinces, and it's by Juan Cardenas, and it's translated by Lizzie Davis. And this is a supernatural thriller, truly weird metaphysical crime novel about a biologist who returns home to Colombia after 15 years away to live with his grieving mother. And he gets a job as a substitute teacher, I think in like a girls' boarding school, I want to say. I don't know where I got that from, but yeah, a girls' boarding school. That's somehow relevant. Eventually finds himself reinvestigating the unsolved murder of his brother. And then it says, but there are no easy answers or culprits in this novel, and nothing is as it seems. Another book from Biblioasis called Cocktail by Lisa Allward, and these are short stories that I've been seeing getting a lot of praise. They're all set in Canada from the 1960s to present day, and some examples of stories include a girl who receives a bedtime visit from a drunken party guest, and that guest will haunt her dreams and fantasies for years. A young mother discovers a portrait underneath wallpaper that awakens inconvenient desires. And a father and his troubled teenage son spend a summer in a cabin while a bear lurks nearby. The stories are described as coolly dispassionate with crisp storytelling, and I think it sounds pretty great. From Melville House is a novel called The Heart of It All by Christian Kiefer, and this is a novel that features 3 families in small town Ohio in a community that is dealing with the fall of industry, family tragedy, racism, poverty, heartbreak, and the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump. From the website, it says, the heart of it all asks how one manages in an America of increasing division to find a sense of family and community. And the writing is described as beautiful and insightful. Author Rabi Alameddine says, if you want to find out the kind of novel that an offspring of Richard Russo and Alice Munro would write, look no further. And it was also compared to Richard Ford and Marilyn Robinson. From Belt Publishing, which is a great Rust Belt Midwest publisher, is Love and Industry, a Midwestern workbook by Sonia Huber. And these are essays that take a deep look at the small town's towns that butt up against Chicagoland, specifically one town called New Lenox, where the author grew up. And in these essays, Huber explores how New Lenox and the Midwest shaped her life, from her parents' small business to her waitressing job at Pizza Hut to the region's influence on writers like David Foster Wallace. And these are experimental and really inventive essays. And to quote one blurb, take seriously Chicagoland's farthest reaches, gritty, sweeping, a region full of its own distinct feelings of almostness, and transforms them into a map of the heart. And I love that term, almostness. From Restless Books is a novel called Fishing for the Little Pike. And this is by Juhani Karila, and this is translated from the Finnish by Lola Rogers. And this is the English language debut of the Finnish author Karila, and it's about a young woman who sets out on her annual pilgrimage to Lapland to catch a pike. And she has this curse that is hanging over her head that says each year she has 3 days to catch this pike. If she doesn't do it, she and the love of her life will die. But this year, she is thwarted by a variety of mythical creatures, as well as a murder detective who is hot on her trail. From Gallybagger Press is a novel called Beasts of England. It's by Adam Biles, and this is its sequel to Animal Farm, in which Manor Farm has reinvented itself as a petting zoo, and which Rachel Cusk says is just fantastic. Really funny, clever, timely, and sufficiently uncategorizable to deliver itself of its dark message with lightness and charm. Ah, the sweet sound of my son coming home from swim class. I'm only halfway through. You're home.
I'm gonna help you after lunch.
Okay, you'll help me after lunch. You got McDonald's? How are you gonna help me?
I'll come back to help you with food.
Okay, he's gonna help me after lunch. I guess I'll be back. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Before we get started, I have a question for you. Do you know what a wolf tree is?
No.
A wolf tree is a tall, old, craggy forest tree that's bigger than all the trees around it, and it has long, spreading branches all the way up and down its trunk, not just branches at the top, but all the way. And it's surrounded by smaller trees, and it's the old, grumpy old man tree of the forest. Have you ever seen a tree like that?
No.
No? I think I have, in the forest. And I've wondered, why is there that big tree when all these other trees are small? There's a reason that I just found out. Way long time ago, when people were clearing the land for fields and pastures and farms, they would cut down all the trees, but they would leave one tree in the middle of the field. Maybe they would leave that tree because they wanted just to have some shade, an option for shade.
Oxygen. You need oxygen.
Oh, and oxygen too. That's a good point. But on the field, they wanted to maybe have somewhere they could go to be in the shade, or maybe they wanted there to be acorns that fell from the tree for like pigs or something. Squirrels too, yeah. So they would leave one tree in the field, but then maybe they would abandon the field and it wouldn't be a farm anymore. And so all that land that had been the forest started to grow back in around this one tree. But this one tree had been living its whole life with all the sunshine it could ever want. And so all its branches grew really big, and all that didn't have to compete for any light. And so it had branches on the lower trunk. All the other trees, as the people abandoned the fields and farms, the trees would come back in and they would grow in this forest up and around this one giant tree. And that's the wolf tree. There's a poetry collection called Wolf Trees by Katie Hartsock, and it's from Able Muse Press, that uses this idea and image of a wolf tree as a metaphor for all of these amazing poems. And the poems also evoke a lot of ancient Greek myth, which I know you love, and also popular culture. And no, I know. From Acre Books is a book called On the Way to the End of the World, and it's by Adrian Haran. Before I describe what this book is about, we need to have a little history lesson. So in 1963, John F. Kennedy decided that the U.S. Marines needed to be fit enough to walk 50 miles in 20 hours. And so he made this decision and announced it to the country. This sparked a national fad that went way beyond the Marines. For a short period in 1963, Americans across the whole country were planning and taking these big walks known as the JFK 50. They would do this around their town, around their hometowns, wherever they lived. This novel takes place in 1963, and it's in an isolated region in the Pacific Northwest, and it features a whole cast of characters from this small community who show up for their hometown's big walk. And they're going through thick forest and along the coastline of Washington State, and on the way, they stumble upon the abandoned car of a young woman who had gone missing, and so it's rekindling this mystery in the town.
I want this story.
Oh, yeah, I've already told him this one, of a missing mother and her 2 young children. So you have this whole great historical setup that turns into a mystery, a small town mystery. It has blurbs from authors who I personally adore, like Deborah Magpie Erling, Jess Walter, and Ricky Ducrenay. And so nothing sells a book to me like a blurb from an author I admire. So what do you think about that?
I think.
You think monkey. Well, that's clearly not going to work. So we need a new method for sharing books. We have a timer.
Yeah.
Right?
And the meanwhile here will punish my mom if she doesn't get it.
If I take longer than a minute to talk about the book, I receive punishment. But here's the rule. You can't talk or make any noise until the minute is up. Nothing in front of the camera, no talking, no bouncing, no throwing, no breathing, no blinking. Where is this gonna live? Up here?
Right next to me.
Well, then our friends can't see it.
I'll do.
All right, why don't you do it, but you be trustworthy about it. Don't you lie.
I have a good idea.
Do you have the timer ready?
The timer is starting now.
Okay. From Nine Arches Press is a poetry collection called Tormentil, Tormentil, I don't know how to pronounce that. Oh God, I'm so nervous. By Ian Humphreys. And on the publisher's website, there's actually 3 videos of the poet reading 3 poems from this collection. And I just thought they were really, really lovely. So from the website, it says that these poems are set largely in the starkly beautiful West Yorkshire moorlands. And these poems creep and bloom across geographies and time. Isolated by grief in the first months of the pandemic, Humphreys goes in search of hope and blessings among the burnt heather, tumble-down mills, and canal locks near his home in the Calder Valley. And it just sounds so lovely. How'd I do? I still have time left?
Yes.
Okay. From Milkweed is a novel called House of Caravans, and this is by Shilpa Suneja, and this is a generation-spanning debut novel that's split between 2 different time periods. So the first period starts in 1943 in Lahore, and it follows characters navigating the tumultuous years surrounding partition, and in particular focuses on 2 Hindu brothers who find themselves stranded in Pakistan as violence against Hindus in the area intensifies. And then the second period is in 2002, in the wake of 9/11, as the long-standing tensions between Hindus and Muslims in the United States really flare anew. And a brother and a sister find out that they actually have 2 different fathers, one Hindu, one Muslim. And one blurb compares this to White Teeth by Zadie Smith, and in terms of structure of the novel, and it's described as it was intense, evocative, and a powerful debut. All right, next up. From Graywolf is a novel called The Box, and it's by Mandy Suzanne Wong. And this is a very, very experimental novel that centers on a mysterious white box, which only one person has ever been able to open. And it's set in a snowy city, and various unnamed narrators tell their stories of their encounters with this box, and a legend starts to grow around this mysterious box. And there's one mysterious woman who pursues the box with deadly desperation. And from the publisher's website, it says the author challenges our understanding of subjects and objects, of cause and effect. Is it only humans? Yeah. Is it only humans who have agency? What is or isn't animate? What do we value and what do we discard? How'd I do? Oh, I did it. I finished. All right, wait. Oh God. Okay. From Split Lip Press is a novella called Sister Golden Calf, and it's by Colleen Berner.
Cow?
Yeah, Golden Calf.
Cow?
Calf. Yeah, Golden Baby Cow. It's by Colleen Berner. I am so excited to read this book. I actually started it last night. The publisher actually reached out to me about this book, and I realized that it's totally up my alley, and so I went and I purchased a copy for myself, and it sounded so good. So it's about two sisters who are on a road trip to spread the ashes of their mother, but they also have with them, the way they make their living is they sell these jars that look, to many eye, look empty, but they actually contain like the soul of an animal or like nightmares or hopes and dreams or things like that. So they're selling these empty jars as they're on this road trip. And it
Ready for one?
I'll tell you more about it later. From Norton is a novel called Digging Stars, and this is by Novoyo Rosa Chuma. And this is a novel that entwines astrophysics with family drama and the politics of Zimbabwe and the US. And it's about a young Zimbabwe-born physicist named Athandwa, and Athandwa is accepted to a graduate program in the US, and it just so happens to be the graduate program where her father made his name and went to school. And her father was a famous genius in the field of astronomy and a absolute revolutionary in the field, but also she barely knew her father. So she finds herself dealing with the uncomfortable reality of living now in the US, and also grappling with the mysteries of her late father's life. Done.
Ding, ding, ding.
From Counterpoint Press is a novel called A Dictator Calls, and it's by Ismail Kader, and it's translated by John Hodgson. Kader is an Albanian writer who's often cited as a potential future Nobel Prize in Literature winner, and this is a story of a 3-minute phone conversation between Joseph Stalin and Boris Pasternak, the writer and author of Dr. Zhivago. Stalin called Pasternak to ask Pasternak's opinion of the arrest of the dissident poet Osip Mandelstam, who had been arrested for writing a poem criticizing Stalin. So just imagine yourself getting a call from Stalin asking you your opinion about the arrest of another writer. Oh my God. And so the novel is made up of 13 variations of that conversation from different witnesses, including the author's wife and lover. And so it's just 13 variations of this conversation.
What landed on your lap?
Don't
you dare throw it at you.
From different witnesses. From Two Lines Press is a collection called Electric, and this is from multiple authors and translators. And these are stories and poems from 8 female writers, all from Haiti, Martinique, and Guadeloupe, that explore what it means to be Caribbean in the 21st century. And these are all translations from French into English. And there are 5 short stories and then multiple poems from 4 different poets. So stories and poems. And it's part of Two Line Press's Calico series, which is published biannually. And it says it captures vanguard works of translated literature in stylish, collectible editions. From Tin House is a poetry collection called Have You Been Long Enough at Table? And this is by Leslie Sains. And the title comes from Hemingway's novel, The Old Man and the Sea. And this poetry collection, as the publisher says, explores the personal and historical tragedies of the Cuban-American experience through a distinctly feminine lens. From the University of Wisconsin is a novel called Dry Land, and this is by B. Platic. And this is an alternate history and also a blend of history, magic, and science. And it's about a young forester living in Wisconsin during World War I. And he discovers that he has this magical ability to grow plants within minutes just with a single touch, or not, I don't know if it's a single touch. He can grow plants within minutes. And so he dedicates himself to restoring the forests of northern Wisconsin. And he doesn't tell anyone but his lover, Gabriel, about his talent. But word spreads around the town, and eventually his ability is discovered and he's drafted to grow timber for the war effort. So he's shipped to France only to find out that what he thought was actually a gift is in reality a curse. From other press is a novel called The Most Secret Memory of Men by Mohamed Mughar Sarr, and it's translated by Lara Vergniaud. And this was longlisted for the National Book Award, and Sarr was also the first author from sub-Saharan Africa to win the Prix Goncourt, which is one of France's highest literary prizes. And this is described as a literary mystery in the vein of Bolaño's Savage Detectives. And it's the story of a young Senegalese novelist in Paris who discovers this legendary book from the 1930s and descends into this mystery surrounding this book, this 1930s books author. And meanwhile, the novelist is also befriending a group of... Oh! From New York Review of Books is a novel called Our Philosopher, and this is by Gert Hoffman, and it's translated by Eric Mace Tessler. This was originally published in 1986, and it takes place in 1930s Germany. And it's the story of a professor named Herr Welkenfeld, who moves to a small town in Germany after he's suddenly and inexplicably dismissed from his university. And the narrator of the novel is actually a young boy named Hans, who's this sharp and curious young boy and pays really close attention to what's going on in the town, especially as over the course of the novel, Hans witnesses how the town begins to turn against this professor, Welkenfeld. The novel never uses the words Jewish, Nazi, or Hitler. It's all told through the eyes of a boy who really has no idea what he's witnessing. And as one blurb of the novel says, it's all the more terrible because we know so much more than Hans does about what's happening to Professor Welkenfeld and what's happening to millions of other humans at that same moment. And it's absolutely giving me chills and chest squeezy feelings just thinking about it. But this one sounds phenomenal. Oh! From Erewhon Books, which publishes fantasy and speculative fiction, is a novel called The Pomegranate Gate. And this is by Ariel Kaplan. And one blurb describes this as a sweeping, epic Jewish fantasy. And it's the first in a new fantasy series that's set in Inquisition-era Spain, and it's heavily inspired by Jewish folklore. So you have two characters, Toba and Naphtali, who are among the thousands of Jews who flee their home after the queen demands that either every Jew convert or face banishment. Along the way, as they're fleeing, Toba stumbles into a pomegranate grove that leads into another realm, into a fantasy world called Mazik, which has its own inquisition going on that is even more dangerous and more powerful. And finally, from Norton, the Iliad, a new translation of the Iliad from Emily Wilson, has been published in September. And Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey came out in 2017, and it became widely regarded as a really fresh, important, revelatory new translation of the work. I think it was actually the first translation of the Odyssey by a woman that was published. And at long last, here's Emily Wilson's translation of the Iliad, and I think it would be a really cool project to read them both together. Super excited to see that. That is the last book on my list for the month of September 2023. Let me know what sparked your interest in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me and my kiddo here today for this.
Better punishments next time.
We'll have better punishments next time. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you later. My name is Sarah. Bye!